Hello and welcome once again to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities. As always, please begin with the development of the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to apply this in order to remedy suffering universally and ultimately establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment, perfect awakening. So we're presently studying the chapter on karma, and this is part of the section what we normally refer to as the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, that change the mind. And the intention of this lies in that we're programmed in a particular way. We can't really escape the fact that we think in terms of a particular way. We make choices, we prioritize. Our minds are occupied with a number of issues that generally are directed towards rather, of course, all of this is relative, but in terms of looking towards enlightenment and really even just looking towards temporary happiness, these objectives are actually rather superficial. And that's where we're actually redirecting our mind towards a perspective that has far more weight, far more authority in terms of the realities that we find ourselves in. The fact that we are going to die, the fact that our actions have an impact, the fact that presently we possess an incredible opportunity with a precious human rebirth. So these are perspectives that are not exactly sort of communicated in the general media and is not readily available in our everyday life. But these are reflections that we then need to be proactively engaging in order for us to actually begin to align ourselves with a perspective that really has a lot more maturity and a lot more sense. So that's where these reflections, they bring our mind towards the path of liberation. So we begin with invoking the primary author of the root text, Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mindfulness, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity. Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So in this way, invoking the Jigme Lingpa. Somebody is saying there's no sound. I suspect this might be in your end. There might be others who can confirm there is sound, right? I think so, yes, exactly. All the way to Greece and wherever else. Bulgaria. That's good. Well, the person in question lives about 5 miles from here, so okay, I think we're good. So hopefully your sound will remedy itself, or you'll fix it, get onto it. Okay, so in the root text, let's try and make this a bit elegant. In the root text here, it says, and then, although the intellect cannot identify each action of the mind and mental factors interwoven in the dualistic thoughts of beings, 10 actions and their consequences are to be rejected. They are based upon the body, speech, and mind. Now we're going to look at 10 familiar themes in terms of what not to do. And once we identify what not to do, we implicitly then understand what we need to do. So we talk about the 10 non-virtues first, and then these are followed by discussion of the 10 virtues. Again, it's very important for us to, in order to understand the sophistication of the law of karma, it's very important that we don't fall into this unjustified critique of the law of karma, where karma is perceived as something overly simplistic. So karma takes into consideration, of course, the cause that leads to a result, but also all the conditions that modify a particular effect of an action. So we've discussed this in quite some detail, but this is important, particularly now because we're going to be saying, okay, these actions have these results. But of course, that's also always, you could say, grosso modo. This is has a lot to do with, of course, and we'll also look at that, the intention before, during, and after. And that's also where we understand that for a karmic effect to be complete, a number of conditions have to be present. Also, we need to understand that we can never understand fully karma. I think we mentioned that, discussed this a few times, but of course, we cannot entirely know what are the actions that led to a particular situation and what are the results of particular actions either. We'll never completely know that unless we're fully enlightened. But we can understand, of course, that particular actions have particular results. So looking at then verse 18, let's see here. So the crucial role of intention. Negative actions regarding the three jewels, and then the crucial role of intention. So that's what we're looking at now. So really referring to the previous discussion, Kangyur Rinpoche says it should be added to what was just said, that the 6 consciousnesses and their associated sense faculties are found in ordinary beings and therefore characterized by the dualistic apprehension of subject and object, are the doors or media through which karma is accumulated. Okay, what we're talking about here is when we talk about 6 consciousnesses, this means the experience of qualia of various kinds that we perceive, let's say a white wall, right? And then there is generated in our mind white wall. And we share this, by the way, with others. Now, if we were to go over and sort of attack the wall with sophisticated instrumentation and break down to the level of the subtle particles, we probably would have a hard time finding white. But nevertheless, there we are perceiving a number of phenomena on the basis of objects. This is a very interesting discussion. I don't want to actually go too further. I'm a little bit opening a Pandora's box there in terms of what we call epistemology, because do the phenomena that we perceive, do they correlate to the reality of what's out there? Anyway, can't keep I can't keep away from that Pandora's box. Anyway, then we essentially are talking about objects, and then we have sense faculties, let's say my eye, that perceives that, right? And on the basis of the object, which is not particularly mentioned here, we're just basically talking about the objects, what is generated in my mind, the consciousness, and that's associated with the faculty of my eye, right? Now that generally, the consciousness that's generated there is very much, you could say the eye is neutral, but the consciousness that's generated on the basis of the input, that consciousness is very much influenced by the situation of the subject here, which is a dualistic subject. It's different from what the Dalai Lama or the Buddha would experience. So that's where this is an ordinary being experiencing. And on the basis of that, I might, for example, say, my lovely white wall, or I need to get that wall painted, and so forth. There's dualistic apprehension, there's dualistic experience, and then on top of that, then there's also the what we call obscurations associated with emotion and also action. And that's where it's not that simple, really, just the perception itself. It comes with baggage. And that's where the experience that we have on the basis of a particular consciousness is very much characterized by the dualistic apprehension, the person that we are, someone who's caught up in subject-object. And once we have that layers itself. There I am, sort of just completely infatuated and delighted over my clean white wall, right? That layers itself. I might have dreams about this white wall. So it layers itself on our ground consciousness. It sits there as an impression, memory, if you like. So Kangyur Rinpoche then goes on to say the agent of this accumulation is intention, virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. Okay. Now, to be honest, my relationship to my wall is rather neutral, but it could be one in which I delighted. For example, I might think, oh, this was my friend, you know, who was so kind, who came here and helped me paint the place. So there's a virtuous accumulation in terms of the intention, basically gratitude, right? And rejoicing and kindness that's extended to this person. It might also be non-virtuous. I might sort of begin to think about the price of paint these days and the evil capitalists behind that and so on. It might generate negative action, you could say, intentions. So, etc. This is fairly obvious, but that's the kind of three ways that we engage then in terms of our intention. Kangyur Rinpoche says intention arises in association with other mental factors. For example, the three types of feeling and the three types of perception. Okay, let's just see what the footnote says. The three types of feeling are, on the basis of the perception, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Okay, happy, not happy, you know, whatever. The three types of perception mentioned here are associated with the three realms: desire, form, and formless. So that's where we then have particular realms that come on the basis of these particular perceptions, and they are then subcategorized into the small, intermediate, and great. So these kinds of this kind of way that the intention is mingled in terms of other mental factors, other kinds of attitudes within the mind. This then is the way that they're generated. This is how intention then arises. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, thus good and bad karmas are accumulated and stored in the alaya. So there we are. We have, and this is taking place at every micro moment actually, that we have likes and dislikes. We might not be conscious of what's going on, and it happens basically at every given moment of consciousness, which are very short moments of, you could say, of awareness that we sort of just link together and have a sense of continuity, but they're singular moments, and these then are experienced in terms of these intentions, and it's then that which is stored in the alaya. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, it is, however, impossible for the ordinary mind to pinpoint how and how many subtle karmas are created, and this is where what we talked about earlier. It's very difficult to know exactly what kind of karma is created. So quoting from another commentary on the Yönten Tse, the commentary by Khenpo Yönten Gyamso, the quote here says, this means that it is impossible to say which thought has generated which action, giving rise to which result, right? This is what we talked about before. It says you go to footnotes, so we'll do that. I think we're good. Let's just go back. Yeah. All right. So, oh yeah. Sorry, I actually stopped mid-sentence here. Okay. So it is, however, repeat, it is, however, impossible for the ordinary mind to pinpoint how and how many subtle karmas are created by the 84,000 kinds of discursive thought. Nevertheless, it is a fact that through them karma is generated. Again, simply the complexity of actions leading before a particular experience and the experience that will follow from the present experience in terms of the way that we act in the present moment. So as such, then we're going to look at 10 actions that are defined, you could say consistently as negative. there are 10 ways of behaving, Kangyur Rinpoche says, related to body, speech, and mind, and they are to be abandoned. Okay, so the first is then corresponding to verse 19, where it says, 3 are of the body: killing, theft, and sexual misdeeds. Of these, the first occurs when willingly one takes the life of one correctly understood to be alive. And linked with this, the harmful acts. And linked to this are harmful acts like beating and the rest. Okay, that's killing. So, Kangyur Rinpoche comments, to begin with, there are 3 physical acts: killing, taking what is not given, and sexual misconduct. These are followed by 4 negative actions of speech: lying, divisive speech, worthless chatter, and harsh words. Finally, there are 3 negative actions of mind: covetousness, evil intent, and wrong views. First of these, killing. A complete act of killing takes place according to 5 criteria. This is important, and this is also where we can see the complexity with regards to karma. So for this really to qualify as the negative act of killing, there has to be 5 criteria present. A living being must be the object of the action. B, there must be no mistaking the intended victim. C, there must be the specific intention to kill. D, the act must be performed knowingly. And E, the death of the being must ensue. So again, we might intend to kill someone, but then again, if somebody beat us to it and had already killed that person, then we might think that we had killed somebody. You know, these bizarre things probably could happen. And that's actually where we're not entirely karmically responsible entirely, you know, even though the intention might have been there, because we actually, there's not a living person in charge. Like I say, this is slightly sort of far-fetched, but anyway, do you get it? There must be no mistaking the intended victim. This again, this is where we're clear on who we're killing. Okay, I don't want to get too silly, but you know, there's sort of the idea that, oops, I killed the wrong person, that sort of thing. But here there's absolutely clear that there's a living entity, there's somebody that we intend to kill, we know who it is, that we intend to kill them, and then we actually follow through. The act must be performed knowingly, yeah, and the death of the being must ensue. Again, it's very negative if we attempt to kill somebody, but then they might survive. There, you could say a lot of the karmic, the evil, you could say the karmic result will ensue, but it will be less if actually we don't actually succeed. So there's a number of things that apply there. You can see the complexity of it. So similar to this are all acts of aggression when death occurs, through beating and so forth, even when death is not actually intended. So there's a number of things that apply where we are essentially aggressive and violent. Okay. 2, theft. Verse 20, to steal is knowingly to take another's property. And linked with this is taking through deceit and fraud. Sexual misconduct means to join with persons pledged elsewhere, and linked to this are all improper acts of intercourse. So the act of taking what is not freely given is fully accomplished when 4 elements are present. The object concerned must be the possession of another. So us taking something from, you know, from a field that nobody owns and so forth is not considered stealing. The Tibetan is machin palemba. It's basically taking what is not given to us. But in that it's not owned by anybody, then it's not necessarily a fully qualified act of theft. The agent knows that this is the case. We know that we're stealing. The agent knowingly appropriates it. Knowing that, we go ahead with the act. The object moves its location and becomes the agent's property. So the sneaky agent takes the object home and essentially regards it as their property. Related to theft are acts whereby things are acquired by deceit, for instance, in commercial transaction, or by extortion through the imposition of unjust fines, confiscation, and so on. So that's where we can say sometimes business can be tainted, in terms karmically tainted, or also you could say associated with being a ruler or administrator, taxation, and so forth, can also be sometimes regarded as sort of a difficult gray zone karmically. Sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct takes place when three elements are present. A, it is known that the object of desire is the partner of another, or else a person engaged by someone else. One is aware that one is in the presence of a representation of the Buddha or of persons with pratimoksha ordination, clerical or lay. One has intercourse with someone judged inappropriate in terms of custom, time, or any other criterion. And we'll just define that. What does it mean somebody is judged inappropriate? Okay, well, it's quite universal. It's, for example, underage persons, a pregnant woman, or a person falling within the forbidden degrees of consanguinity. I had to look that up, and that essentially refers to incest, or you could say family relationships. And there's a little in different cultures, there's different degrees of, you could say, how you interpret some. In some cultures it's quite common to it's kind of seen to be okay to marry your cousin. Other cultures it's not. Pregnant woman, that's something, again, that's a little bit different from our culture, where there's not generally an awareness of that, but there's the sense in the Buddhist tradition, there's the awareness that actually the fetus suffers when someone's having sex while they're pregnant. So this is something I think that's normally not really discussed in our culture. Anyway, there we need to take it from those that have, you could say, the insight into that. Then there's, so that's the first, that's in terms of the object, the other. And then there's the actual physical union, okay? So that actually we follow through, and there's satisfaction. That's, you know, it was consummated. So these three aspects are complete. Now, included in sexual misconduct are improper sexual acts. Okay, and this is where, as this is elaborated sometimes in quite some detail in other texts, for example, jewel ornament of liberation and other places. And this can sometimes be a little bit of an issue. Sometimes traditional teachers will sort of go into some great detail. And as a layperson in our particular culture, I sort of was a little bit, how do you say, felt the need to research this more. And I was very happy that the Venerable Kangyur Rinpoche, he actually, there was some questions about various practices, you know, basically the way that that's accepted as the norm within modern cultures. And he essentially just, he basically just said, you know, this point here in terms of sexual misconduct, you need to apply that, interpret this in terms of the particular cultural context. So this is where you need to abide by whatever is the prevailing conventions within our particular culture, but they are very different, obviously. So that's where there's a little bit of leeway and flexibility around this point. So this might come as a relief for some modern lay people. Anyway, lying. So 21. Then now we're coming to the four misdeeds of speech. So the root text says the four misdeeds of speech are lying, whereby others are deceived, and linked with this all guile, which misleads others' minds. Divisive speech, which sows hostility midst friends or people neutrally disposed. And linked with this, the repetition of another's censure, fostering resentment. So here then it says, Lying occurs when 4 elements are present. The speaker must not be mistaken about what he or she wants to say. So they're clear about what they're saying. The speaker must have the intention to deceive. So they're perfectly aware of that. The lie must be consciously pronounced. The hearer must be deceived, i.e. the lie must work. Associated with lying are all attempts to twist the truth by deceptive means and the concealment of the facts in order to cheat people. Okay, so that's lying. Now, at that point, this also applies actually to the whole range of what we're talking about here. Because, for example, in Western philosophy and ethics, we have something called, from Immanuel Kant, the categorical imperative, which is where Kant says, well, a negative action is a negative action, and you should, regardless of whatever the circumstance, you have to stick with the virtuous action, the ethical action. So in the case of saying, for example, you can't lie, that also means if you have a sort of a bloodthirsty pack of bullies that are hunting down somebody, and they ask you which way did he go, then you're actually, according to Kant, you're actually obliged to say, oh yeah, he went that way, you know. But of course, this is where we understand that the intention behind, in this case, is really what affects the karma. And that's where it's a virtue to, in that case, lie, to say, oh, I have no idea, or actually send them down the wrong track, right? So that's where we apply this. We have the 10 non-virtues, but we would say the first 7, they can actually be practiced if there is a noble intention behind. So of course, within Western ethics, there's various proponents of different views, but the sort of the idea of the categorical imperative certainly doesn't apply here. So the intention is what matters. Divisive speech. Here, 3 factors are necessary. So this is speech that sets friends apart, right? A, the people affected must be living in harmony, or at least in relationship of neutrality. The agent speaks in order to divide the parties. Discord arises between them, or at least the meaning of the speaker's word comes home to them. So this is where we're talking about people who actually are friends, or at least not enemies. And the intention is to set them apart, and that it works, or at least it has an impact. They begin to doubt each other, what have you. Allied to divisive speech is the repetition of criticism or abuse spoken by others in order to nurture resentment. That sort of, hey, do you guys know that so-and-so is talking like this about you, etc., right? Divisive speech. Worthless chatter. This comprises 3 elements. We'll see the verse 22. Worthless chatter, which is futile talk that causes wanting or rejection, and linked with this, all useless talk of wars and banditry, all harsh words whereby others' hearts are torn, and linked with this, all talk that brings unhappiness to others. So Kangyur Rinpoche says this comprises 3 elements. A, the conversation is motivated by the defilements, meaning the kleshas. We're driven by the kleshas, attachment, aversion, ignorance, pride, and jealousy. The mind strays to what is unwholesome. So the mind is sort of spiraling downward towards that which is not constructive. And then the result, futile chatter, occurs. In other words, conversation productive of attachment or aversion. This covers, for instance, discussions about the sacrifices described in the Vedas. Okay, now this is not particularly directed at the Vedas as such, but this is essentially just talking about traditions extrinsic to the Buddhist tradition, where you might, for example, where there might be some prescriptions for actions that are negative, for example, animal sacrifice, or actions that that might be, harmful in some way. And in some traditions, then particular actions then are actually prescribed as being that are prescribed, which we can see are harmful. You know, some different traditions. You know, what is it again? Female circumcision and what have you. These things, right? So that's where the animal sacrifice and so on. So these kind of discussions that just sit around and chat about that is regarded as futile, unless we're getting proactive and actually sort of doing something about it. But just the sort of the chatter, the pointless chatter. Okay, poetry, historical discourses about the rise and fall of empires, singing, recounting of legends, erotic literature, and the tales of adventure and crime. Now, this pretty much this how do you say, this marginalizes pretty much every aspect of entertainment known within our culture. This, if people were to sort of subscribe to this universally, it would be bad for Netflix. It would be bad to the majority of, you could say, arts, really. So again, we have to take into consideration this comes from a different culture. But that said, we also should try to notice, in terms of just our intimate relationship with ourselves and our awareness, that we can see when something really is futile chatter, pointless chatter. And of course, sort of, you could say, extolling great literature or something interesting and so on, can be something that's uplifting. You have some remarkable literature, you have some remarkable erotic literature, you have some remarkable arts and so on, singing and so forth, that actually does bring about something which is not necessarily trivial or indulgent. Now, I'm a little bit, of course, I'm clearly not in the position to redefine the Buddha's words and so on, but I would at the same time say I think this aspect of culture applies, and I would say it's very much about us applying a sort of a internal discernment about, you could say, essentially the quality of just pointlessness, or if there actually is something that you could say lifts us. Anyway, Kangyur Rinpoche says, related to worthless chatter are all unnecessary conversations about wars, crime, and so forth, even if this does not provoke attachment and hatred. So again, this is very much, and this is very much what's, you could say, so prevalent in our culture, because we're so conditioned to just pointlessly be looking for distraction and entertainment that we basically tag along with any kind of, you could say, pointless narrative or objects of information that really just ultimately are what we could deem as worthless. Okay, 7, harsh words. This depends on 3 factors. Let's see it, yeah. A specific person must be addressed. The person is spoken to harshly and hidden faults are exposed. The words pierce the person's heart, causing trauma and sorrow. So this is directed at somebody, and the intention is in order to, first of all, it's rough, insensitive speech, and it's about making them feel uncomfortable about who they are. And it has then, the effect is achieved when it actually hurts them. So this is where we're intentionally hurting others. So allied to verbal abuse are all kinds of talk that, though superficially sweet, bring about the unhappiness of others. And that's where we can have all sorts of devious, passive-aggressive ways of actually hurting others, even though it might even ostensibly look like we're not. That's where, again, we need to have the internal discernment about what's the intention behind it. Covetousness. Of the 3 non-virtuous acts of mind, the first is covetousness, hankering to make one's own another's wealth and fame, and linked with this, all wanting to acquire what others have. So this is where we want what is not ours. Covetousness has 2 factors. An object in mind must be the wealth or reputation of another. B, one must be obsessed with the other person's qualities and belongings and want to take them for oneself. So this is a very non-neutral attitude. Yeah. Related to covetousness are the reflections on the wealth and advantages of others with the wish to have them for oneself. So it's coming from this incredibly impoverished place of looking at someone else, their possessions, their sweet reputation, or whatever it might be, and it really becomes big in our mind. And that's where we then want this, where we then becomes this sort of toxic attitude of wanting this for ourselves. Evil intent. Then there is malevolence, hating others, wishing harm to them, and linked with this, resenting their good fortune, wanting it to end. Then wrong view is denial of karma, belief in permanence or else annihilation, and linked with this, declaring what is false, not denying what is true. So these are the last two of the 10. And these last three, by the way, they're never okay. I mentioned earlier that the other 7, really what constructs their karmic weight is the intention. So for example, if we lie in order to save somebody, that's a virtue. So we're lying, but it actually, the karmic weight, the karmic impact actually is one that's positive. And we even look in the life of the Buddha in the previous life, where he actually committed some of the physical non-virtues, and these were all, because of the Buddha's pure intent, are regarded as virtues. But the last 3, no. This thing here, because it's all taking place within the mind. So the first, covetousness, the second, evil intent, and the final, wrong views. These all, there's no excuse. These are at all times negative. So for evil intent, then it says 2 factors are required for evil intent. The object must be a living being. So if you're getting impatient with your computer, it's not working, and you're thinking you should throw it out, or throw it out of the window, or your latest device is not working, and you sort of start punching it or whatever. That of course reflects an evil intent, but it's not, the object is absent in this case. So the object must be a living being. B, the agent hates and deeply wishes to harm the other, desiring his or her misery, whether physical or mental. Wishing harm on others may be connected with any of 9 objects. So these 9 objects then are those who cause trouble to oneself, those who attack one's friends, those who aid one's enemies. These 3 categories, multiplied by 3 according to past, present, and future, come to 9 objects altogether. So these 3 objects, those who cause trouble to oneself, those who attack one's allies, one's friends, and those who help those who are opposed to us, right? These then, the evil intent really has to do with whether or not we're talking about the past, present, or future. In addition, there are 5 factors that accompany evil intent. These are hatred, rancor, injured pride, vengefulness, and ignorance. So we can see together with evil intent that this comes along with all these sort of, resentment or rancor and, hurt pride, etc., etc. The vengefulness, we want revenge and so forth. Kangyur Rinpoche says, related to evil intent is discomfort at the advantages of others, such as riches and long life, and the wish that they did not have them, but rather their opposites. So it's the wish that others, we first of all resent their well-being, and also we wish that they become misery. Like Kangyur Rinpoche says, we desire his or her misery. So finally, and these actually, we would say these are among all the 10 non-virtues, the worst is actually, of course, the 3 ones here. But the worst really is then the final one here, wrong view. So I'll just go over what it actually says here in the root text. The wrong view, then wrong view is denial of karma, belief in permanence or else annihilation, and linked with this, declaring what is false, denying what is true. Now, this is kind of particularly pertinent for us who live within a scientific paradigm which basically is shaped by what we call false views. Now, this doesn't really mean we should sort of take up a jihad against, the entire culture we live in, or even be sort of antagonistic. But at the same time, we really need to understand, we need to be sort of equipped with a critical discerning that understands that pretty much everything that filters down within the cultural discourse that we live within is actually informed with this belief. So there's two kinds of false views. This belief in the ineluctable principle of karma. And that really means that we are shaped according to our actions, which in itself, of course, is not that difficult, and that pretty much aligns itself with most of what we call the natural sciences, cause and effect. But it also very much is understood in terms of the intangible area of our consciousness, our being, and also it plays across lifetimes. So that means we're not born into this world as a tabula rasa, as we very often like to think. A child that comes into this world is utterly innocent. They might appear innocent, but that's just because they're sort of the motoric skills aren't developed, the brain hasn't been developed, and so on. The persons that we live across countless and re-embody ourselves over countless lifetimes, and that is really what we're talking about in the Buddhist teaching. And that's where we have a much wider perspective in terms of who we are and also the consequences of our actions in terms of understanding then karma. And then belief in a permanent self and phenomena, or the opposite, namely nihilism, the belief that nothing survives death. So we have these two extreme beliefs. One is one that asserts absolutes or reality, and the other that disposes of that. The consequence of this is essentially the idea of, on one hand, meaninglessness, but also on the other hand, that there's actually nothing that survives death. And that's where nihilism very much lies up along the lines of what we can call materialism. Again, the scientific paradigm that we live in which then the mind is really seen as something that's produced by matter, or you could say subtle matter, organisms, biological systems, and so on. But nevertheless, there's nothing that survives death. Belief in the permanent self and phenomena, that's where we have this, we have it in the religions, but strangely enough, we even have it in the sciences. And it is this idea that we'll find the absolute building block of phenomena, and that there is the absolute sort of truth about phenomena. And again, that's where the Buddhist teaching says reality just doesn't lend itself to that belief. And there's nothing within reality that actually sustains that assumption. But nevertheless, we have it in religions, the idea of an absolute creator, a first mover, and we also have it in our belief with regards to our personal identity and also the external phenomena. There is nothing, if we investigate, that actually substantiates these beliefs, paradoxically. But of course, there are appearances, and that's a whole different matter. There's the perception of phenomena of a self and so on. And that's where you could say it's understandable. We can be patient with that kind of belief. But at the same time, in the Buddhist teaching, we definitely see that as a wrong view. It's a flawed science. It's a poorly substantiated assumption. And again, then we have the opposite, nihilism. Again, the sort of, in terms of religions, it's when we throw out the religions and say, well, there's nothing. There's sort of the idea of meaning, and the idea that meaning is something that has to be constructed, and all these kind of the idea of the possibility of truth and the post-truth era and so on. There's some very wide consequences with regards to what we're speaking about here. And that's where we need to sort of carry with us little bit of a discerning, and also based on that discerning, also an enhanced really appreciation for the wisdom of the Buddha, and basically the wisdom that understands how phenomena do not lend themselves to being either existent or non-existent. So it's not just about us dutifully believing in karma. It's not about dutifully believing in, you know, whatever the Buddha says and so forth. It's about us actually really investigating. And this is where we are aligning ourselves with essentially the scientific project of properly, validly discerning the nature of phenomena. And that's where, I'm sorry, this is where you inevitably have to study Madhyamika. You inevitably have to study the middle way. There's no way around it. We need to understand this. Otherwise, everything we're doing on the Buddhist path could very well just end up being practices that we think are wonderful. But unless there's really the view and the insight, then it really just becomes, you know, wonderful, but nevertheless just essentially behavior practices. So that's where view is very important, and that really is the one that is the most significant of all the 10 non-virtues. So then Kangyur Rinpoche comments further here. He says, related to wrong views are claims born of animosity that a sublime being has faults, and this is not the case. And conversely, the denial of the qualities that such beings possesses, thus creating doubts in the minds of others. And this again, then born out of that kind of narrowness, then there is the lack of capacity to appreciate the qualities of sublime beings. Again, this is again coming from the place of not properly understanding what enlightenment is, what are the qualities of the path, and the entire nature of reality, which is such that when we are eliminating the confusion, then there is a whole phenomenology of awakening that manifests. And that is where we talk about the qualities of sublime beings. We marvel when when we meet the Dalai Lama or our guru and so forth. And this, of course, others might hear us sort of gushing about how wonderful our teacher is, and they'll just roll their eyes and shake their heads, because simply this understanding is not present within the cultural discourse and within the minds of such individuals. And that's where, again, this essentially is a reflection of wrong view, where there's just the incapacity to understand these qualities. And then that can lead to then sort of a denial, you know, that, you know, so-and-so is not at all, you know, it's actually pretty bad if you sort of begin to talk about great beings and you put them down. This is regarded as something that we'd at all times want to avoid. And also because it can create doubts in the minds of others. This is actually something that could what we call block the door to liberation. So that's what we also, this is what we wouldn't want to do. We might, for example, we might even be Buddhists and we have great regard for our own teacher, but then there might be somebody who has a really great teacher, but who doesn't exactly fit the mold in what the kind of how we think a teacher ought to behave. And so we begin to criticize them, and then our friends who are following the other teacher, they begin to have doubts about that teacher. That's also extremely negative. So the bottom line, the bottom policy in this regard is just have universal advice from all the sages is just have pure view with regards to all traditions and all individuals. Yeah. So these were the 10 negative actions. Okay, let's just have a look here. A few questions. Okay. Are intentions impulsive? Yeah, very much so. So we need to know what's happening within our mind. Intentions arise very quickly, you know, likes and dislikes. This we know from looking at the mind. So yes, they are very much impulsive. Actually, since you use that word impulsive, samskara, we need to understand how we actually act on the basis of what we call the 5 skandhas. the notion of the self is created on the basis of the initial duality between self and other, positing a solid self, a solid external world of form. That's the first. Then there's feeling, I like, I dislike. Then there's the concept, you know, good, bad, and so forth. And on the basis of that, then the mental factors that drive then aversion, attachment, and what have you. So this is where it comes from. And then we have corresponding experience, the consciousness. What about euthanizing an animal when it is suffering? It doesn't seem like an act of aggression, but rather compassion. Very distressing to watch an animal suffer in pain. Thus, the motivation isn't to kill, but to relieve suffering. Well, exactly. That's where we can understand that karma is complex. Yeah. So there's not as if there's rules for this and that. That said, specifically for those who understand more about what happens to individuals when they pass on, there is a general advice to not assist others with dying. And I know this is a big discussion in ethics in general, but of course also within the Buddhist realm, because we do actually in Buddhism say we really shouldn't, we actually would avoid euthanizing. So that's a biggie. But then again, if people are if people are about to do it, then personally my policy is, then to just know that there's no, you can't change it, and you're only going to aggravate the whole situation. And then just say, well, first of all, you understand that they're not doing it from, like you're pointing out, they're not doing it from a negative place. And secondly, also then just propose that they pray. They pray for the individual and the further journey of the one that's dying. Maybe the baby really likes the oxytocin, though thought Buddhists didn't think sex was dirty or unacceptable. Might be nicer for a fetus to experience love in a relationship rather than fighting. Oh, definitely. Which science shows does impact the neurophysiology of the baby. Okay, this is in the case of sex when someone's pregnant. Yeah, I get the point. It's definitely a loving embrace is definitely better than fighting. It's more just from individuals that remember what it was like to be inside a womb. So that's where that comes from. But of course, yes, fighting is not good. That's an extreme, yeah. Yeah, where oxytocin positively impacts the baby's growth and well-being. Again, there's a sort of a cultural element in this, but maybe we could suggest sort of gentle lovemaking at that point. Regarding divisive speech, what if the agent has not intention to create division, but may somehow say something which could cause a rift? This is something that has happened to me in the past. Yeah, but try to notice again what Kangyur Rinpoche is saying. Let's just have a look at the actual text, because there's a lot of emphasis really on where, this place. Let me just go to it, because I bet you it says in terms of the objects and the intentions to it's okay. Let's see here. Divisive speech. Okay, 3 factors in this. The people affected must be living in harmony. Okay, so that maybe you unintentionally. Okay, so that's a given. Okay, that sounds like that's the case. The agent speaks in order to divide the parties. Oh, there you go. Already B is missing. Okay, if B is missing, then essentially what we're saying here is that you need these conditions for the full karmic ramification, and that's where then the agent speaks in order to divide the parties. Well, that's clearly not the case, right? Because that was not the intention. Yeah. So yeah. So take heart in that. Even still, of course, when unintentionally something like that happens, we feel bad about it. That there's not like the satisfaction. Yes, I managed to divide them. So again, the full karmic effect is not there. Yes, to practice no worthless chatter, to truly be a non-worldly person. How amazing! Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you notice this with Now you notice it. There's some practitioners. They will literally stick to never saying. You could say having a worldly conversation. They might be a little bit difficult to be with sometimes. They difficult to take them out and so forth. You know, they don't make great company during happy hour, what have you. But they're also sublime beings, you know, who even though they actually engage in chatter, somehow the chatter there is always taking it to a place of what we could call the wholesome. So this is very interesting. For example, Dinguchen Rinpoche, in the evening, people would sit around. There would be a sort of a warm family atmosphere where Rinpoche would sit and tell stories, and he would make others tell stories, but the whole atmosphere was sort of created, thanks to Rinpoche, really, in which everything really went towards a virtuous place, a constructive place. So this is where the chatter then doesn't exactly become worthless, even though there is some chatter happening. Again, a lot to do with the intention. Regarding lying, what is advised in the case that one is part of a cultural group or family in which one must tell lies or conceal the truth in order to avoid criticisms and alienation? Well, that's again probably in the category of, well, again, this is motivated. Again, this is where, well, the intention defines everything, right? So that's where you just got to go with the flow, play the game, and so forth. And sometimes also we have the whole issue of white lies. So that's again where like I said before, this sort of categorical imperative that one must not tell a lie doesn't really apply. So yeah. We have very venerable master who use social media in interesting ways, but surely it couldn't be worthless chatter. It's their compassionate interface with our own ignorance, I guess. Well, that's the thing. Again, there's somebody who it appears like it might be chatter, it might look frivolous, but it's not. If we really look, it really has a constructive angle and a constructive impact. DJK, Tsongsa Gyalrong Khyentse Rinpoche, is a filmmaker. Are his films indulgent or are they worthwhile conversations? Haven't seen many, just one. No, they're not. They're worthwhile. They're worthwhile conversations for all the above reasons. Yeah. Hi, Jakob. Regarding the 10 non-virtuous actions, I wonder what the implication would be in the case of having the urge to commit any one of them as thought arising in mind, but then do not proceed to with action. So you don't act, but it arises in your mind. Do karmic results get activated here? Yeah, they do actually, but luckily not heavily. So yes, we sort of get annoyed and it does leave an impact on our mind. But it's so important when we don't engage it with the speech and we don't engage it with the body, and also we have regret, we stop, etc. So I mean, we're shaped by our thoughts, we're shaped by our actions, but of course it makes a big difference. Yeah, again, the complexity of karma is only too obvious. Yeah. But that said, this is also why we continually practice Tibetan the word shakpa, putting aside negative actions, like the practice of vajrasattva and so on that we do really to being completely clear, knowing on the basis of what we call the first witness, ourself, knowing what's happening in our mind, we then actually need to purify that as well. Yeah. Could you please show the root text for the wrong view again, as I couldn't see it on your screen? All right, I shall do that. Wrong view? Oh, sorry, this is the commentary. It's just 2 lines. It says here that, so then wrong view is denial of karma, belief in permanence, or else annihilation, and linked with this declaring what is false, denying what is true. Huh? Okay. Oh, time's up, people. No more questions. I'll just finish what's here. Okay. If you were stuck in what appeared to be a white room for the rest of your composite body's lifetime, what would you do? Well, I'd pray to the guru that I might get out. But otherwise, make use of it. I mean, that's where we're lucky. I mean, especially in these COVID times, that's where us Buddhists in Moab, we're actually incredibly fortunate because we have a way of working constructively with the mind. Yeah, not easy to be stuck inside a white room, for sure. Is the view to do with the four seals? Yeah, that the four seals basically are associated with what we call the first turning of the wheel. Yeah, the view of impermanence, suffering, selflessness, or no self. Yeah, like that from What Makes You Not a Buddhist. Yes, yeah, 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 yeah. That is it. Yes, the view. But then we have, in general, in the first turning of the wheel, that's generally how we understand the view. Then again, the view also, and then as we proceed along the Mahayana, we also begin to understand, you could say, a deeper level of things in terms of their emptiness nature and so forth. Is it a negativity to do nothing about others' wrong view? Well, it's again, this is so relative because it might not be that easy. It's very difficult to do something about others' wrong view. That's where we basically have to just wait until we are asked. Yeah, probably doesn't help if we go out there and proclaim the truth when we haven't been asked. Yeah, you can always pray. When ordering this text, there are 2 books available. Do we order book 2 and book 2? This is book 1, isn't it? Yes, this is book 1. Might we later study book 2 also? Maybe later, but no plans as present. So for the time being, order both books. They're always nice to have there. They're very holy. And the book 2 is mainly about the Vajrayana. So just have it there as, you could say, what we call tendril, auspicious conditions. Do bodhisattvas have intention? Does intention, good or bad, only refer to the confused ordinary mind? Thank you very much. Well, that's a good question. Intention at the end is something that originates from Buddha nature, and that's why we say the Buddhas and the highest level of bodhisattvas, their actions actually manifest on the basis of essentially the absence of obscurations and the manifestation of Buddha nature. But that said, all along the way, bodhisattvas very much abide by intention, and we could almost say the entire Mahayana is defined in terms of the intention of bodhicitta. So that's where actions, physical actions, verbal actions are secondary. The main MO, or the main way of the bodhisattva has to do with intention. Yeah. If there were only mental but no material theft, such as imagining grabbing others' phone, is it evil action, theft, or evil intent? Thank you. Well, yeah, you're just looking at somebody else's phone and you think, maybe I could get away with it. Well, there's a subtle karma there. Of course, okay, you don't do it, you don't actually do it, but there was that intention there. So you of course, this shapes the mind. Then again, we can purify it, and it's not as bad as if we actually followed through with the action. Yeah. But it applies, like we talked about earlier, it really applies that we then need to actually, if we're aware of it, then we need to actually purify it afterwards. Yeah. For someone who has realized nature of mind from pointing out or whatever causes like practice, will that person still arise unwholesome thoughts like greed, malice, ill will, etc.? Yeah, definitely. That's where Paltar Rinpoche, in his commentary on that kind of teaching, he says, the arising as is before. Arisings in the mind are just like before, but the crucial point is the way of liberation. And that's where someone will have, and we're not talking about sitting wanting somebody else's phone or being angry, but it's basically the moment that thoughts arise, they're instantly, basically, we don't fixate on them. And so that there's what we would call liberation upon arising. But this is the scope of, you could say, yogis and quote unquote advanced practitioners. And of course, depending, eventually such a person will greatly, somebody, because you're saying realize the nature of mind. One is to have to have sort of introduction to the nature of mind, and then to be on the path, practicing the sustaining the insight of the nature of mind, in which case then we talk about then continually liberating what arises, where we would say thoughts arise like they ordinarily do, but then we sustain, or then the practitioner will sustain this practice of not fixating on what arises. Yeah. But if it's somebody who has completely realized the nature of mind, then it's different. Then we would say even such thoughts, they rarely arise, and it just doesn't work in the same way. So of course, it's until we achieve perfect enlightenment, then gradually, then you could say the situation changes. But all along the way, then there is generally, we would say, the arising due to previous karma of, you could say, familiar patterns of thought. With regards to a suffering being and deciding to kill it to alleviate suffering, I think it's such a hard decision. I agree. If we do this, we could be interfering with a sentient being. Yeah, that's the discussing we had before. Yeah, karmic ripening, right? Very hard to know what to do. Very hard, very hard. Totally feel terrible. Merci. Okay. Je t'en prie. What karma is produced if you're convinced, just if you've convinced yourself of a lie? For example, if Hitler believed he was doing an act to benefit others by exterminating others, if though we can see its hatred, if the mind believe it's noble, does that make it positive for that mind? Yeah, well, that's again where we're looking into the complexities, because it also involves others. Yeah, there's the other one who is suffering. So there's the intention, which of course then in this case is a profoundly confused subjectivity. That's one thing, and there you could say there's various factors that are involved. It's difficult to say that there probably isn't a degree of hatred and anger and so forth, but we could theoretically surmise that possibly there was some sort of belief system happening in the case of Hitler's policies, even though that's complex and very difficult to justify. Then certainly on the part of those who were the recipients of these policies, yeah, the victims of these policies, then definitely the suffering arose, and so there can never really be a positive result coming from it. Can we ever ask the question of what mechanism processes our karma, or is this beyond our samsara mind to comprehend? Yeah, well, that's where that point about it's really only an enlightened person who will fully understand the nature, the workings of karma. Yeah. Okay. If there is no permanent phenomena, then what is continuity? The passing of Thich Nhat Hanh. Yeah, but that's relative truth. Of course, within relative truth, we do see phenomena as solid. We do experience continuity. We do have karma. We do have cause and effect. We do have suffering and so forth. Yeah. So now that we are so in that we are presently experiencing Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, we're all really, really sad about his passing. Also today, actually, yesterday was the 6 years since Chatur Rinpoche Sanjay Dorje passed away, and so on. So of course, yes. So he says not to be sad about him not being here anymore, but today we will find him in our conscious breath and walking the rain and leaves. Is impermanence a type of continuity as well? Sorry, just trying to understand it. No, this is a good question, and you could say yes. What we have is a continuity of impermanent phenomena, if you like. Yeah. By the way, I was just reading about Thich Nhat Hanh, and what was it again? He says, please don't make a big fuss out of this. Please don't, do big things. And please don't make a stupa for me, he says. And if you make a stupa, then write on it, I'm not here. And then he says, but then underneath you can write, I'm not anywhere else either. And then you can finally, he says, you can write, if you wish to meet me, I am present within your mindful breath. Yeah, very sweet, very beautiful. So so then another question. So I'm hearing that it is sort of okay to sometimes participate in some of these unethical actions out of a sense of being non-aggressive towards one's own culture, non-Buddhist associates, watching movies, chatter, working a modern job, etc. But that motivation is the bottom line. Would that be right? Yes, that would be right. You know, there's no way around. You know, we can't just say I want out. We're here, and but our motivation really and our intention makes a big difference. Regarding impulsiveness and intention, regarding impulsiveness and intention to action, is it the critical shift to create conscious, wholesome intention and response to circumstance through mind consciousness? Also, what are we doing here? Educating seventh consciousness. Okay, regarding impulsiveness and intention to action, is a crucial shift to. Yeah. We should always develop the intention. That's definitely what we're doing. And what we're educating the seventh consciousness. Yeah, you can say that. That's right. We're educating. You know, we're basically addressing the issue of the seventh consciousness, ego, right? Where do you find Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary? In this book that's called the Treasury of Precious Qualities. So you can find this book in the bookstores. Yeah, I'm just going to bring up the cover. Okay, voila, that's it. So you can find this. It's published by Padmakara, so it's findable. Okay, we'll conclude with dedication. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the oceans of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much. See you next time.